Ever heard of Abu Nuwas?
Can't say I have.
Well, he was a poet back in the early Islamic period. And get this, his work openly celebrated same-sex love.
Wow, that's pretty surprising. You don't hear that too often.
Right. It really challenges some assumptions, doesn't it? Which is why we're diving into this proposed podcast script today.
It sounds intriguing already.
Oh, it is. It grapples with this whole complex relationship between LGBTQ plus identities and Islam.
Definitely a topic that could use a deeper look, going beyond those surface level narratives.
Absolutely. So the script starts off laying out the basics, that Islam, like many religions, has traditional teachings on sexuality and gender roles.
Right, rooted in those interpretations of the Quran and Hadiths.
Exactly.
And that's actually where so much diversity in viewpoints comes from. It's kind of fascinating when you think about it.
Totally. The script even brings up the story of Prophet Lit, which seems to come up a lot in these conversations about homosexuality.
Yeah, it's a classic example of how interpretations can be so different. Some scholars might view it as condemning exploitative behavior, not necessarily consensual same-sex relationships.
While others have more conservative interpretations.
Exactly, which is why understanding Islamic jurisprudence is so crucial here.
Islamic jurisprudence.
It's essentially the study of Islamic law and how it's derived, how those interpretations come about. Because, you see, those interpretations can change depending on who's doing the interpreting, when they're doing it, and even the cultural context of the time.
So many factors at play. It reminds you that even within one faith, there can be this whole spectrum of beliefs.
The spectrum, exactly. And that's what makes this conversation so interesting.
What really stood out to me was how the script then shifts gears and puts the focus on the voices of LGBTQ plus Muslims.
Centering those voices, making them the heart of the matter that's so essential.
Totally. It talks about how so many LGBTQ plus Muslims are navigating their faith and their identity, facing almost like a double challenge when it comes to acceptance.
And that dual struggle, imagine that. It can be so emotionally intense. Some might feel rejected by their own religious communities, while others are struggling to reconcile their identity with their beliefs. It's a really complex internal landscape.
It's a lot to carry, which is why organizations like Queer Muslims and Iman LGBTQI+ are so important, right?
Oh, absolutely. They provide support, advocacy. They're a lifeline for so many. Their very existence challenges this idea that you can't be both LGBTQ plus and Muslim.
Like it just disproves that whole misconception by showing the lived reality of so many people.
Exactly. It's about showcasing that lived reality.
This is starting to paint a more complete picture for me. It's not just one Islamic view out there, and LGBTQ plus Muslims have incredibly diverse experiences.
Precisely. And then, if we dig into history, we find even more unexpected perspectives.
You mean the part about medieval Islamic societies? That some documented a range of sexual and gender expressions more than we might think today.
Exactly. It's a part of history that often gets overshadowed. Remember Abu Nuwas, the poet we talked about at the beginning? He was celebrating same-sex love during the Abbasid Caliphate, which was like a golden age for Islamic civilization. Why was this tolerance, even celebration, present back then? Societal structures? Philosophical trends? Or was it something else entirely? It really challenges those oversimplified narratives we hear about Islam and LGBTQ plus identities.
It's almost like history is giving us a whole different lens to view the present through.
I like that, a different lens. It's a powerful way to think about it.
But of course, we can't ignore the very real challenges LGBTQ plus Muslims face today.
Of course not. The script doesn't shy away from those difficult realities: familial rejection, discrimination, and in some countries, even the criminalization of same-sex relationships.
It's a stark reminder that we have such a long way to go when it comes to true equality and acceptance.
Definitely. It's a reminder to keep pushing for change. But in the midst of those challenges, the script also points to a growing movement for inclusivity within Islam itself.
Like those scholars, right? People like Dr. Scott Siraj al-Haq Kugel, who are reinterpreting those Islamic teachings through a lens of compassion and affirmation for LGBTQ plus identities.
Exactly. His work, and the work of so many others, shows there's room within Islamic thought for greater understanding, for greater acceptance.
It seems like we're witnessing this push and pull between traditional interpretations and these newer, more inclusive ones.
A push and pull, a tension.
Ow.
That's a great way to put it. And the script really delves into that tension, suggesting ways we can create dialogue, build bridges of understanding.
It's within those nuanced, sometimes conflicting spaces that real change can happen.
You got it. It's about embracing that complexity.
And speaking of concrete change, the script even offers some examples of what that could look like.
Yeah, like creating those safe spaces within religious communities, places where LGBTQ plus individuals feel truly seen and valued.
But wouldn't that take a massive shift in attitudes for some communities?
It would. A conscious effort to challenge those deeply ingrained beliefs, absolutely. The script also highlights the potential of reinterpreting those sacred texts through a lens of compassion and inclusivity, like looking at the same verses and hadiths that have been traditionally used to justify exclusion, but finding new meanings within them.
So it's about bridging that gap between tradition and modernity.
Mm.
But it's an ongoing process, right? It doesn't just happen overnight.
It's an ongoing process, a journey, and it involves building bridges, not just within Islamic communities, but also between Muslims and non-Muslims.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we've covered the challenges, that historical context, and even some potential paths forward. But what does all of this mean for the individual listener? Where do we even go from here?
Well, that's where the script's concluding message really shines.
You mean where it emphasizes that every person's journey is unique? Like there's no one-size-fits-all solution here.
You got it. It encourages each of us to consider those diverse perspectives and find what resonates with us personally, what speaks to your heart, what aligns with your values.
It's an invitation to continue the conversation, not just within ourselves, but with others.
Exactly. And to approach this topic with a certain mindset, curiosity, compassion, and above all, an open heart.
Because there isn't one easy answer, one right way to think about it.
And that's okay. It's in that space of uncertainty, of ambiguity, where real learning and growth can happen.
So what would you say to someone who's listening to this and feeling, I don't know, overwhelmed? It is a lot to take in.
I'd say it's perfectly okay to feel overwhelmed. These are complex, challenging topics. It's not like you're going to have all the answers immediately. Just approach it with that same curiosity and compassion. Be willing to keep learning and growing.
It's a journey, not a destination.
Precisely. Be patient with yourself, have those respectful dialogues with others, and remember, even small acts of understanding, small acts of kindness, those can make a difference.
It's about creating those ripples of change, right?
Exactly. One conversation, one interaction at a time.
The script even suggests some resources for those who want to dig deeper, explore further.
Oh yeah, definitely. Organizations like the Queer Muslim Project and Iman LGBTQI+ Silpe, the work of scholars like Dr. Kugel.
Those are great places to start for anyone feeling ready to dive in.
They offer so much information, personal stories, different points of view.
Resources like that are so valuable.
They remind us that we're not alone in this. There are individuals and organizations out there fighting tirelessly for a world where LGBTQ+ Muslims are fully included and accepted.
It's inspiring to know that work is happening right now.
It is, and each of us can play a part in that work, however big or small.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you think will stick with our listeners?
For me, it's remembering that there isn't a single Islamic view on LGBTQ+ identities. There's a whole spectrum of interpretations, and understanding that diversity is crucial.
Avoiding those generalizations, that's so important.
You got it. And just like there's diversity within Islam, there's incredible diversity among LGBTQ+ Muslims themselves. Their experiences, beliefs, journeys, they're all unique.
It's all about respecting that individuality, listening to their stories, and really grasping the complexity of their lives. This script does such a great job of bringing those stories to the forefront.
It does, and through those stories, through that human connection, I think we can start to cultivate more empathy, more compassion. This isn't just an abstract theological debate. It's about real lives.
Real families, real communities.
Exactly. It's about seeing that shared humanity in everyone, no matter their sexual orientation or gender identity.
And understanding that inclusivity and understanding that's a journey we're all on together.
A continuous journey. One that takes effort, open-mindedness, a willingness to challenge those preconceived notions we all have.
So, as we wrap up this part of the episode, what would you say to someone who's listening and feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this? It's a lot.
It's perfectly okay to feel overwhelmed. These are complex topics, and you're not expected to have all the answers right away. Approach it with curiosity, with compassion, and with that willingness to keep learning.
It's about taking that journey one step at a time.
You got it. Be patient with yourself. Engage in those respectful dialogues, and remember, even those small acts of understanding and kindness, those can make a world of difference.
Creating ripples of change, one conversation, one interaction at a time.
Exactly. And if you're looking for a starting point, remember those resources we mentioned. The Queer Muslim Project Iman, LGBTQI+, the work of Dr. Kugel.
They're great places to start for anyone who wants to explore this more deeply.
They offer so much information, personal stories, different viewpoints.
And most importantly, they remind us that we're not alone in this. There are people out there working tirelessly to create a more inclusive and just world for LGBTQ plus Muslims.
It's a fight worth fighting, and together we can make a difference.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? This whole idea that we need to be having these conversations, pushing for that change.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there's work to be done, both individually and as a society.
It feels like this deep dive, this whole script, it's less about finding a definitive answer and more about opening up these new questions, these new ways of thinking.
You hit the nail on the head. It's not about telling anyone what to believe. It's about encouraging people to engage with this topic on a much deeper level.
To really wrestle with it, and that's what makes it so compelling, right? It doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. Like we talked about the discrimination, the challenges LGBTQ plus Muslims face, but then it also highlights those working toward inclusivity within Islam. It's like holding both of those realities in mind at the same time.
It's acknowledging that tension, that complexity, and seeing it as a catalyst for growth, both individually and collectively.
And remember, we're talking about a proposed podcast script here, a medium that can reach such a wide audience.
Right, exactly. Think about the potential impact.
Imagine someone listening to this who's never really considered these issues before. It could be eye-opening.
Absolutely. Hearing those firsthand accounts from LGBTQ plus Muslims, learning about the different interpretations within Islamic thought, that exposure can be so powerful.
It could spark empathy, understanding, maybe even a change in perspective.
It could, and that's the beauty of open, honest dialogue.
It makes you realize these conversations are happening everywhere, within families, communities, even within ourselves.
It's about personal journeys, societal shifts, and those internal struggles we all face. It's all interconnected.
The script does such a good job of weaving together all these different threads, the personal stories, those theological debates, the historical context.
It's that weaving together that creates a richer, more nuanced picture, one that reflects the real world with all its complexities.
And speaking of the real world, the script suggests some pretty concrete actions we can take to foster inclusivity.
Like creating those safe spaces within religious communities, places where LGBTQ plus individuals feel truly welcomed and affirmed, places where they can be themselves without fear of judgment or rejection.
But that doesn't happen overnight. It takes a real willingness to challenge some deep-seated beliefs, doesn't it?
It does. It takes courage and a commitment to growth. It's about those difficult conversations, listening with open hearts and minds, being willing to learn and grow together.
It's a process, for sure. The script also talks about reinterpreting those sacred texts, finding new meanings that resonate with the lived experiences of LGBTQ plus Muslims.
And that's crucial. It's about engaging in that deep, rigorous theological scholarship, looking at the historical context of those texts, the evolving needs of society. It's all part of the process.
It's like finding that balance between honoring tradition and embracing progress.
Exactly. Recognizing that faith isn't static. It's a living, breathing thing that can evolve, adapt over time.
And that evolution often comes from challenging the status quo, questioning those long-held assumptions, being open to new perspectives. It can be uncomfortable, for sure.
It can, but that discomfort can be a sign of growth. That's where dialogue comes in. Having those open and honest conversations, not just within our own communities, but with those who hold different views.
It's about bridging those divides, building empathy, creating space for mutual understanding, even when it's hard.
You've got it.
Yeah.
Recognizing that shared humanity, even in the midst of differences. I think that's a really powerful message to carry with you. As you reflect on this deep dive, as you think about how you might engage with these issues in your own life.
It's definitely a lot to process. But I'm curious, if we were to distill everything we've talked about today, what would you say are the most important takeaways for the listener? What should they really remember?
Well, first and foremost, remember that there's no single Islamic view on LGBTQ plus identities. There's a spectrum of interpretations, a diversity of thought that we often overlook.
So no sweeping generalizations, right?
Exactly. And just as there's diversity within Islam, there's also incredible diversity among LGBTQ plus Muslims themselves. Their experiences, beliefs, journeys, each one is unique.
So respecting that individuality is crucial. Listening to their stories, understanding the complexity of their lives. This script does a great job of putting those stories front and center.
It does. And it's through those stories, through that human connection, that we can start to cultivate greater empathy, greater compassion. This isn't just an abstract debate. It's about real people.
It's about recognizing that shared humanity in everyone, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity.
Precisely. And it's about remembering that the journey toward inclusivity and understanding, that's an ongoing process.
One that requires effort, open-mindedness, a willingness to challenge ourselves.
You got it. It's a journey worth taking.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what would you say to someone listening who might be feeling a bit overwhelmed by all this information? It can be a lot to digest.
It's perfectly natural to feel that way. These are complex issues. No one expects you to have all the answers right away. Just approach it with curiosity, compassion, and a willingness to keep learning.
It's okay to take it one step at a time.
Exactly. Be patient with yourself. Engage in those respectful dialogues with others. And remember, even small acts of understanding and kindness can make a world of difference.
It's about creating those ripples of change. Right?
Exactly. One conversation, one interaction at a time. And if you're looking for a place to start, remember those resources we mentioned. The Queer Muslim Project, Iman LGBTQI plus I, the works of scholars like Dr. Kugel.
They're excellent resources for anyone who wants to dive deeper, explore different perspectives.
And most importantly, they remind us that we're not alone in this. There are people out there working tirelessly to create a more inclusive, more just world for LGBTQ plus Muslims.
It's a reminder that gives me hope.
Me too.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in this journey, however big or small.
It's good to remember that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That there are those support systems out there, people working to make things better. It's like this script really emphasizes that whole community aspect.
Oh, it does. And that's one of its strengths, I think.
Yeah.
This reminder that learning, growth, it happens best when we do it together, in dialogue with each other.
Like we're all figuring this out together, this whole idea of how to create a more inclusive, more understanding world.
Exactly. And sometimes that first step is just listening.
Just being willing to hear those other perspectives.
Right. To listen to those who've been marginalized, to understand their stories, their points of view, acknowledge their pain.
To see how their experiences challenge our own assumptions, maybe force us to confront those biases we all have.
It's about stepping outside those comfort zones, right? Engaging with the world in all its complexity.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into this script, what do you think are some of the most important takeaways for our listeners? What will they walk away with?
Well, I think that diversity of thought within Islam, that's a huge one. The script does a great job of showing how those interpretations of religious texts can vary so widely.
And how those varying interpretations can lead to different understandings of LGBTQ plus identities?
Exactly. It's a good reminder that there's no one right way to approach faith. Yeah. Even within the same religion, you can have this huge range of beliefs and practices.
It's about respecting that diversity of thought.
Absolutely. And just as important, I think, is remembering that LGBTQ plus Muslims, they're not a monolithic group either.
Right. They come from all sorts of different backgrounds, different interpretations of their faith. They navigate their identities in their own unique ways.
And the script really highlights how important it is to center those voices, to listen to those lived experiences.
To let them speak for themselves.
Exactly. And it's through those stories that we gain a deeper understanding of the challenges, the resilience, the hopes they carry for the future.
It's about seeing them as individuals, not just representatives of a group or an ideology.
Right. And recognizing that inclusivity, it's a collaborative effort. It takes those open, honest conversations, a willingness to challenge our own biases, and a commitment to creating spaces where everyone feels safe, valued.
Speaking of challenging our biases, we talked a bit about the historical context, too. It's fascinating how those medieval Islamic societies, they sometimes had more fluid understandings of sexuality and gender than we might expect.
Oh yeah, that was a really interesting part of the script. It makes you realize that our views today are so shaped by those historical and social forces. What we consider traditional or normal isn't always fixed, unchanging.
Makes you question your assumptions, for sure, and approach history with a more critical eye.
Definitely. But we can't just romanticize the past either. It's important to acknowledge the discrimination, the prejudice that LGBTQ plus Muslims are facing in many parts of the world today.
And to actively work towards dismantling those systems of oppression.
Absolutely. Action is key.
The script did offer some steps we can take, some practical actions toward a more inclusive future. Promoting dialogue, creating those safe spaces within religious communities, reinterpreting those sacred texts through a more compassionate lens.
Those are all great starting points. And they require a collective effort. It's not just on religious leaders or activists. It's something we can all contribute to. in our own ways.
So as you're reflecting on what we've discussed today, what sticks with you the most? What are you left pondering?
I think I'm left with a sense of hope. This script, while it doesn't shy away from the challenges, it ultimately points us toward a path of greater understanding, greater inclusion.
And it reminds us that we all have a role to play in making that happen.
We do, every single one of us.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking deep dive, and I really encourage our listeners to continue exploring these topics on their own. If you're feeling inspired to learn more, those resources we mentioned earlier, the Queer Muslim Project, Aman LGBTQI plus ASI, and the work of Dr. Scott Siraj al-Haq Kugel, those are all great places to start.
They offer so much valuable insights, personal stories, different perspectives.
And remember, approach these topics with curiosity, with compassion, with an open heart.
It's in those spaces of genuine engagement and dialogue that we can really learn and grow together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and let's all continue to work towards a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who